You're listening to the Cash Flow Academy podcast with Andy Tanner, your source for investing made easy. Here's Andy Tanner.
Welcome to the Cash Flow Academy podcast. I'm your host, Andy Tanner. This is where we do our very best to make investing simple, and very excited for this conversation that's about to take place. And I think I'll set it up this way. I was born right before we landed on the moon, so that ages me a little bit. And I was too young to remember. I think we landed on the moon 2 months after I was born. And that all started with a space race. You know, President Kennedy said, we choose to go to the moon and do the other things, not because they're easy, but because they're hard. And there was a satellite, and I believe it was called Sputnik. And it was Russia that launched that, and it started a space race. It started a race to where we, kind of had to get going, and it was who's going to get there first. And whoever got to the moon first, great technology. Well, my guest today, it reminds me of a space race of sorts, and to me, it's a much more critical race. We have Chris Miller, and he has a really important book about the future. And it's called The Chip War, the fight for the world's most critical technology. I think the most, there's a lot of the Ukraine-Russia conflict and the role China is playing with that, they're emerging. And so I like to spend a lot of my time thinking about, that chess game and how that affects me as an investor. So understanding, global events, understanding those types of positionings, important stuff. So with that, I welcome Chris Miller, author of Chip War, the fight for the world's most critical technology. Chris, thanks for spending time with us. I'm excited.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Tell us a little bit about your background and, start wherever you'd like and bring us to the point where you decided, hey, we need to have a book about this. Why did you write the book, and what was the background leading up to it?
Well, I'm an economics historian by training, and so one of the questions that has always interested me is why is it that some countries are able to develop advanced technology and others aren't? And about 5 years ago, I started digging into the initial research that led to the book Chip War, trying to understand the miniaturization of computing power, how it is that 50 years ago, computers took up the size of an entire room, whereas today we've got miniaturized computing power in our smartphones and all sorts of other devices. And it turns out that the process of miniaturization was one of the most complicated engineering challenges really in human history, and it was intimately bound up with military requirements, because the first computer chips that were invented to fit in missile guidance systems during the Cold War. And so there's been a really deep relationship between the military and chip firms and the computing industry in general since the earliest days.
One of my dear friends, he's actually related to me. He doesn't work directly for the military, but I think he's like a top secret. He can't really talk much about what he does, but I think, from what I gather, he's an anti-cyber terrorist. In other words, he, when they start doing stuff, he tries to track it down. And it's frightening to me, the breakneck speed at which this is changing. And, let's talk about AI for a minute. And AI means a lot of different things to different people, but whatever AI is, we know it's like the internet, right? It's big. I don't know what it is, but it's big, and it's going to be big. But when you can start to have machines think at that level and begin problem solving at that level, that really is, am I wrong in making that analogy that this is a lot like a space race? And, if someone can plan, I don't think it's like you have AI or you don't. It's kind of an evolution, right? But the person who makes the biggest leaps, they really do control a lot. And particularly if you feel, and I don't know that the U.S., my home country, is a good player, but if you feel people are willing to spy, cheat, lie, and gather information and hack, that's kind of, and where Bitcoin and some of these cryptos are a big deal, and you're going to put your wealth into ones and zeros, you want to make sure that you have a good defense in this area. Yes? What's your thought on that? You mentioned the military connection. What's your thought on, so whoever the good guys are, if there are any, those guys staying ahead.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. There really is a competition between countries and also between governments and criminal groups as to who is going to dominate the use of these technologies. And, when you look at the expansion of AI throughout different parts of our economy and society, one of the things that's really striking to me is that if you actually dig into why it is that today, compared to 10 years ago, the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning is so much more widespread, the answer is not because our computer scientists and engineers have gotten 10 times smarter. It's because the chips that they can use to process data or to remember it have gotten 10 times better. And that's the exponential growth rate in computing power that semiconductors have provided, often known as Moore's Law. And that, more than any other trend, is what has shaped the chip war that I describe in the book. And so I think you've really got to understand Moore's Law and the growth in computing power to make sense of all of the use cases of computing that you mentioned.
Yeah, the Ukraine situation it's put China in an interesting situation there. And I think it's human nature to become relaxed, which who wouldn't want to be? I don't want to be stressed all the time about what you could be Chicken Little all day long. And, that never helps anybody. But I do feel like, I like books like yours because I feel like we're sitting on our laurels, for example. Like we should be, as an electorate and as a people, allies, more aware of what's going on and what's at stake. So if I were to just say, okay, what's at stake? Why should people care about this? And why, you're saying this is the most critical technology. It's a fight. It's for critical technology. What is the big thing? What are some of the things that are at stake? If they had a major breakthrough, and I'm talking mostly China, if they have a major breakthrough, how what does that look like? What is it that they get that we don't get? What's at stake?
Well, if you look at the most advanced military systems today, they rely fundamentally on computing power, whether it's guiding a precision missile to its target or communicating intelligence information from spy satellites to weapon systems. Today, all warfare depends on computing, and all computing depends on semiconductors. And if you fast forward over the next 10 years, the world's leading militaries, whether the U.S. or China, are going to be investing only more heavily in autonomous systems, for example, or advanced electronic warfare, which will be even more dependent on semiconductors than it is today. But what's really interesting is that, and this is one of the things we've learned over the course of the Russia-Ukraine war, is that all of the world's militaries rely on semiconductors produced by a handful of firms, many of which are based in the U.S. And so if you take apart Russian missiles that have been captured in Ukraine, they've got U.S.-made chips inside. And that's true. That's probably also true of Chinese missiles, because the U.S. makes many of the best chips, and U.S. machine tools that are used to produce semiconductors are basically irreplaceable in the chip making process. So the entire world's militaries, all of them rely on U.S. technology here, which means that our ability to control who gets access to it is crucially important, not just for economic reasons, but also for defense reasons.
Boy, that's an interesting fact. I did not know that the U.S. had such a lead there. Now, it's called a chip war, so we're trying to get faster, smaller, more efficient technologies there. Is there also, tell me, I probably talking out above my pay grade. The chip is the hardware, but AI is about learning and learning computers and computers that can calculate things. And that means data. And I think about China, and I've heard horror stories. You don't know what's true and what's just hearsay, but they got a lot more people, first of all, than, say, a rival like the United States. There's just a lot more people. And, in the sports world, we classify our high schools based on population. And generally, if you have a high school with 3,000 students as opposed to a high school with 300 students, the basketball team from the large high school, just out of sheer numbers, you're just going to have more good players if you have 10 times the people. So when I think about the amount of data that they can mine, because they have so many more people, so many more data points to monitor. And then I think about the difference in privacy law and politics there. Is China just in a really nice situation? It's like, look, we're going to monitor you and we're going to find out what all your habits are. And we're going to be able to build algorithms from this data. The data will feed the algorithms and we'll be able to use these chips more efficiently because of who we are, how many we are, and we have less freedom. Is that wrong? Am I just being a conspiracy theorist or whatever that is? Or is there any truth to that?
I think you're absolutely right that the quantity and quality of data you have matters, and the types of algorithms that you use to process that data matters. But those are only two of the three things you need to take advantage of artificial intelligence. The third is that you actually need the processing power to process the data, and you need the memory power to remember the data. And processing power and memory power are all about semiconductors. And so I think you're right to say that China's got potentially a leg up in terms of the ease with which the government can collect data given their pretty loose privacy rules. And I think there's no reason to expect that China's going to have any worse algorithms than the United States will. But where China is hugely dependent is in semiconductors, because the data centers that run all of China's AI algorithms are stocked full of U.S. produced and U.S. designed semiconductors, and Chinese firms are far behind when it comes to producing these semiconductors. And so that's where I think the chip war is really most visible, is that, China's caught up in data, it's caught up in algorithms, but it hasn't caught up in chips. And they're trying hard, but they're still pretty far behind.
I want to digress a little bit more into the world of finance, and I use the term loosely when I bring into crypto because that's a whole different ball game. I'm headed down to Vegas here in a couple of weeks, and I've never been asked to speak at a conference with this many speakers. I think there's 135 so far at one conference. So I don't know how they're all going to sort that out and what rooms everyone's in. But everyone's like 20 years old. They're all NFT guys and crypto guys and Web3 guys. And so I've been asked to speak, but I'm going to spend 4 days learning from these young guys. But here's the point. When I think of Bitcoin, I think about obsolescence risk. I remember, I'm old enough, a lot of young people don't even know what Netscape was. It blows my mind. And Netscape? And it was the first browser that really went big. I don't think it was the first one, but it was the first one big. WordPerfect was a word processor that went big. US Robotics would make modems back in the day where we had to dial in, right? And all this technology was, America Online was what email was. And that was the first wave of all this. And of course, technology grows exponentially, and pretty soon, Google Places, Ask Jeeves and Yahoo and the web crawler, and the cream rises to the top. So when I think of Bitcoin, which was really the first prominent way that someone decided to use blockchain to create a currency, is there obsolescence risk to that because of the amount of power and the carbon footprint? And Ethereum has better algorithms within the block anyway. Where do you see crypto going? Do I have any ground to stand on when I debate these guys that are just dogmatic and religiously fervored? They have a religious fervor for their Bitcoin. It says, hey, not so fast. First of all, there's risk. Second of all, we could be talking about Bitcoin the way we used to talk about Blockbuster Video in 5 years. Any thoughts on that?
I think there are some risks that hang over the entire cryptocurrency ecosystem, like you say. Obsolescence risk, I'm sure that's one of them. I don't know enough to predict where the future of crypto is going to go. I think the other risk you talked about, the energy consumption, for example, is a huge issue. And it really all depends on whether or not we're able to produce more and better semiconductors to undertake the types of calculations that are needed, for example, in Bitcoin mining. And right now, some of the biggest semiconductor firms in the world, companies like NVIDIA, have as a crucial market for their companies Bitcoin mining and other cryptocurrency uses. And so the rise and fall of Bitcoin has a major impact on these firms. And I think that's another part of the chip war that's so crucial. It's that there's the geopolitical war between the U.S. and China, which I discuss a lot in my book, but there's also the competition between different chip companies to find the best products that meet certain markets. And for a lot of companies like NVIDIA, crypto has been a crucial market over the past couple of years. And so depending on the fate of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, that will have a major impact on companies like NVIDIA.
That brings up an interesting question. You said you made sort of a compartmentalization, or at least a distinction would be a better word, from the military geopolitical battle to the capitalistic battle. Should, in your opinion, is this in the public interest to enact policy? Is it better to let capitalism run its course, or is it better to enact policy to try to stay ahead? But also, if we've got U.S. chips in foreign military weaponry, what's the role of regulation? What's the role of policy? Should we go? I've got a friend of mine who's an economist. He was an IMF consultant for a long time. He thinks to heck with inflation. He thinks that we should go print another 11, 12 trillion dollars, if nothing more, to invest in technology so you can get AI that'll help you cure cancer, but more importantly, you win the chip war. He thinks it's like when we went to World War II, right? Our debt to GDP ratio was like 150, highest it ever been in the U.S. And it's like, well, if not, Nazis win. Is this a big enough war, this fight for this critical technology, a chip war? Is that worth blowing up the dollar over and printing a bunch of money, trying to stay on top?
Well, I'll tell you what I worry about, and that's the security of Taiwan. Because right now, 90% of the most advanced processor chips are built in Taiwan. So there is a tremendous risk hanging over not only the tech sector, but the entire economy if something goes wrong in the Taiwan Straits. And the fact that the Chinese military is getting stronger and stronger each year raises the risk that at some point Xi Jinping decides to try to assert his control over the island. So I think there's certainly a role for government in trying to reduce our reliance on these geographically concentrated semiconductor production facilities in geopolitical hotspots. We just can't tolerate a situation where the entire global economy is dependent on one small island that the Chinese government has repeatedly promised to conquer. That's a real danger.
That's an interesting.
Whether it costs $11 trillion, I don't know, but I think we're right to say we've got to try to address this issue, and it's going to cost some money to do so.
That's an interesting take, because you have, why are you, if it's U.S. technology but it's being made in Taiwan, why? Well, globalization is deflationary. It keeps things priced well because they'll make them cheaper over there. So there's kind of a conflict that way. Tell me why is it important? Like when you wrote this book, did you write this for computer nerds? I get the feeling this was really to inform the general public at large. What are the things that the readers, and again, we're talking about Chris Miller's book, Chip War, the fight for the world's most critical technology. You can get it on Amazon, and at christophermiller.net, you can get information about the author. I feel like you wrote this more broadly, like, hey, everyone, we should be paying more attention to this than we do. What's in the book that might surprise somebody? Not to be a spoiler, but what is in there that people say, wow, I want to read this?
Yeah, and I think that the key takeaway is that we talk a lot about big tech companies, about Apple, about Facebook, about Google, but none of these companies would be possible were it not for the fact that the cost of computing had declined by a billionfold over the past half century. And that cost decline, the fact that the chip in your iPhone has over 10 billion tiny manufactured components on it that are producing the ones and zeros in all your software, that is only possible because of semiconductors. And so the process of making these chips ever more advanced, growing at an exponential rate of complexity every single year, is the force that's not only driving the tech sector, it's driving the entire economy. And you can't understand tech, you can't understand business, you can't understand globalization, you can't understand geopolitics unless you get your head around how important semiconductors are. So that's the core message of the book. It's that we've been mistaken by thinking tech is about social media, but tech is actually about the semiconductors that make everything else possible.
Yeah, it's the DNA, right? It's the molecular level of this stuff that really runs it. It's an interesting thing as the technology grows. There's always, since I've been a little boy, since I was a little kid, we had the rise of the robots where technology is going to take your job, when in reality it's created more jobs. Technology is going to take your job every single time. We got robots, now going to take your job. Yeah, but now you need people to build the robots. Is there a point, though, where all these Chicken Little people that are saying, hey, your world's going to change? Boy, I'll tell you what, they're getting pretty smart. When I think about decentralization, those ability for these chips to think, I think banks are silly. I think Wall Street is silly. I think DeFi is a big deal. I think it's a legitimate deal. Internet comes by, I don't need a travel agent. I can book my stuff there. So there has been, I guess, some creative destruction to jobs. But man, if these computers can get fast enough, cheap enough, and smart enough, I mean, is there going to be a time where they're doing most of the work and it's like, okay, it's universal basic income for everybody because there are no jobs for everyone because the computers are doing everything. Do you see that? Or is it always going to be more technology just creates more jobs, doesn't destroy them?
I think that's what we've seen over the past couple of decades is that, yes, technology ends up destroying some jobs, but it creates more than it destroys. And as we get more and more advanced technology and more types of unique chips that powers this advanced technology, the number of use cases grows. And so the number of new careers that didn't previously exist also grows as a result. You can look at, when we were discussing cryptocurrency earlier, that was a whole field that didn't exist 10 years ago. And now it's a focal point of conversations like ours. So I think we shouldn't expect that technology is going to put us all out of business. And instead, I think the opposite is really what we've seen over the past several decades.
It's no secret I'm a financial education advocate, and this certainly fits within, your efforts of education every day, everyone. If you're listening, it's a good habit. We try to do a couple podcasts per month, and I ask my producers, and I go after books and authors that I really think would make a great addition to your library. And when the internet came about and you have new hypertext transfer protocols and email protocols, people had what was called techno fright. I think the danger now is more techno fatigue. There's an app for every cockeyed thing, and your phone's updated every year with, some innovation, and we get tired of trying to adjust. I'll tell you what, don't get tired on that stuff because as a citizen in the electorate, it's just the days of waking up and taking your son and daughter out and spearing a fish and taking it home and telling stories around the campfire, probably better mental health for us in those, Paleolithic times. But it's not the world we live in. And so staying on top, being informed, understanding what's real, so important to do. I recommend Chip War, The Fight for the World's Most Critical Technology, written by Chris Miller. As we are moving further and further into the information age, and the semiconductors are the engine to do this, what would you tell people about, that are investors, that are maybe small business owners? What's the one thing they got to watch out for, the one thing they should have a heads up and prepare for?
I mean, the last 2 years have shown that everyone is exposed to the risk of disruptions and chip supplies, although in advance, almost no one was aware of just how damaging that could be. The car industry alone lost over $200 billion when you add up losses across the world because they couldn't get the chips that they need. And that just shows how reliant we are all on semiconductors and the huge financial and economic impact when disruptions occur.
Well, Chris, you've been just gracious for your time. I know you've got a hard stop here at 1:30, but go to christophermiller.net. Go to Amazon.com, pick up Chip War, The Fight for the World's Most Critical Technology, and take what you've learned from Chris, build on it, and really prepare. People always want me to predict. I can't do that, but I'd rather prepare because then you're ready for several different outcomes, not just one or two. Chris, thank you so much for your time. Really exciting, really interesting times we live in, and a great book to describe some of the things we can be thinking about, and a lot of fun. We'll see you next time. Again, my name's Andy Tanner. This has been the Cash Flow Academy podcast. We do our very best to make things simple. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the Cash Flow Academy podcast with Andy Tanner. For more information on investing made easy, go to thecashflowacademy.com.